Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Whiskey Dictionary. I have a guest with me tonight, a returning guest to the channel for probably third time, I want to say, maybe fourth. This is Nick Taylor from Found North Whiskey and other amazing events that he's done in the past. So, Nick, say hi.
Hey, what's up, everyone?
Hey, everybody in the chat. Let us know what you're drinking tonight, because what we're going to be drinking tonight is batch 3 and batch 4 of Found North Whiskey. And so Nick was nice enough. Actually, he sent one of his minions over to bring me a bottle of whiskey. And actually, did your guy tell you that he left with a little prize?
No, what? What is
No,
this?
I sent him home with a bottle of my my 3-chord.
Oh my God, I love your 3-chord.
That's nice to hear. Thank you.
I've got that
I
on my bar. I slam that, so
Yeah, man.
I'm glad he's indulging.
Well, it's funny because I invited him in, right? And I was just like, yeah, come check out the the whiskey cave thing here. And so as we were talking, whatever, and just going over the whiskey, I was like, you know what? You're leaving with a door prize. I
Oh
just handed him
man,
a
that's
bottle of whiskey.
awesome.
So
Yeah, he probably told me, and I probably forgot, to be honest.
that's okay. I'm glad you liked it. That means a lot coming from you. So
No, it's really excellent. I mean, it's really good. I know this about Found North, but I can go upstairs and grab my bottle. We can talk about it at a certain time if it
I might
goes
end up
long
doing that too. But let's concentrate on your stuff, because I have had this sitting behind me for about what, maybe 2.5 weeks at this point, and that's just the worst that I haven't been able to open it. So yeah, all right, perfect. So we're gonna dive right into batch 3 here.
Oh, baby, you haven't opened it?
I
Okay, cool.
haven't. I've been
We yeah, we had some wax tops issues on the first round. The
yeah,
wax popped off too easily,
I
and so
noticed
of
that.
course we told our wax developer that it popped off too easily, and now you're demonstrating the other side of
I
the
was just gonna
coin.
say I'm trying.
Make sure you pull it to the left. I'm
Oh,
serious.
okay.
It makes a big difference.
That's what it was. Okay. Thank you. Am I crazy? Don't they normally go to the right? Or maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
That that's down under.
All right,
In
here we go. Hold
Australia,
on.
that everything it goes the toilet bowl even goes the other way.
Right.
It really throws you off the first time it happens. No Wedding Crasher reference.
Ah,
It's all right.
handed up yeah, I'll do better on the second one.
There we go. There we
I
go.
I delayed it too long, and I think that I didn't get the good pop. Oh well. I'm gonna do a
Oh
heavy
well.
pour here.
We'll have to.
So
Oh yeah. There we go.
so real quick, let me just say hi to a couple of people. So IC86, I saw you in here early. Nice to see you, John, Spencer, Paul, Pinch Hitter Whiskey League, Lounge. Sorry, nice to see you, Zopher. So Zopher, he lives out near where I used to always travel to San Diego for work, and him and I were talking about meeting up or whatever, and then of course Corona. So someday Zopher, we'll hang out and have a drink. But all right, cool. So tell me what we're about to drink here. This one is the rye. So
Yes. Yes. So, all right. So you're tasting batch 3, and to be honest, when we launched this, I'm sure I told you in the last one, we thought we were going to do just rye, and then we made batch 2, and we made it because it tasted good, but it wasn't a rye, and we didn't know whether people would really like it. We didn't really know whether Canadian corn, not bourbon, but bourbony, but still Canadian, but not Canadian because it's bottled here. Like we just weren't sure whether batch 2 would do well, and then batch 2 was a home run, and people
yeah.
loved it. And so sort of going forward, the sort of odd batches will always be a rye, and the even batches will always be a corn. And so in a way, batch 3 is the sequel to batch 1, right?
That makes sense.
And for yeah, right. And so for us, and it's the it's the white label versus you can see on here. First, the blue label will always be the sort of the corn. The white label will always be the rye.
Totally a minor
Yeah, go
thing,
ahead.
but I guess like whatever color this is just like it totally speaks to my brain. Like I love that color. I mean my logo is a little different than that, but I think I would have rather have had this color.
I love this color.
It's like a
I
slate
totally
gray
agree with
blue.
you. Yeah. It's very I don't know. I'm the the label and bottling design is way out of my league, and
Oh,
it's really
totally.
funny because
Yeah.
the boys we designed it in house, and the guys Phil and Sammy, of course, most of all, and then Zach, of course, all like pretty aggressively pitched in on the label design. And for me, it was like, hey, what do you think about this? And I was like, does it have a wax top? Okay, I have no more input.
Perfect.
So yeah, I loved how it turned out, but had absolutely nothing to do with it. More influence on the whiskey, fortunately.
Well, that's the important part anyway. I just like the color.
Stick to your strengths, right? But yeah, so basically, batch 3 is the sequel to batch 1. It's a 17-year cast strength rye. It's just to cover the basics. It's 55.1% alcohol by volume. We put on there American oak as the maturation, which is fair because honestly, there's so many weird barrels in here that you could really pick anything and it would be legitimate. But there's a corn component that was aged in used American oak that kind of brought the whole whiskey together. And so we kind of just try to put the linchpin whiskey as the maturation, especially when we have such weird regimen.
Makes sense.
This particular whiskey was 5 different whiskeys. So that's the sort of first big difference between this and batch 1. Not to say that more whiskey is better, but we've gotten a lot better at blending, to be honest. And
I was just gonna say, I mean, come on, it's you've done 2 batches, now you're better. So of course you're gonna. It makes sense.
Yeah.
You now have an idea, and now you blended for that idea. I'm guessing, right?
Exactly, and the idea that you're gonna just sort of like get it right on the first go, but also like we're trying to make better and better whiskey. We're trying to make different whiskey each time so that they're distinct. But we're also trying to improve at what we're doing. And as you can imagine, like the whole experience of blending is trying to get things in balance. It's okay. We love this flavor. We want to keep this flavor, but we need to alter this flavor. So we put this in, and of course it messes with the thing you're trying not to change, right? So you're constantly, anytime you turn one dial, you're obviously turning the other down or up or whatever. And the more whiskeys, it's just an order of magnitude more things that get tweaked every time you add. There's kind of a misconception that if you do lots of whiskeys, it like whitewashes it. I don't know if that's how it goes with huge. You hear about the big Scotch blends that have 40 or 50 different types of whiskey in it, and like I don't know what that does because I'm playing with 3 to 5 whiskey types, even if it's multiple barrels at a time. But I will tell you, like adding barrels adds complexity, not necessarily complexity in flavor, but a huge amount of complexity in process, because you really are just. You really are just tweaking so many different things, and it's quite challenging. And we feel like we got sort of much better at blending this time around, and part of that was just understanding what grain ratios work well together. So this one's 64% rye, 32% corn, 4% malted barley. Batch 1 was 66-30 as opposed to 64-32, so not a huge change. And that was for a reason. I mean, we liked our rye corn balance in the first batch, and so really this was much more about playing with the barrels within those sort of different ratios. And so we used 3 ryes and we used 2 corn whiskeys this time. And the 3 ryes were aged in. We had a 17-year aged in American, transferred into Hungarian oak. We had an 18-year aged in American oak, transferred into Speyside Scotch casks. And then we had an 18-year aged in American oak and transferred into ex-tequila barrels.
So let me pause you for 1 sec, because you actually do a much better job explaining this than I do. So Hungarian oak, what if you can even describe, what does that do to a whiskey specifically? Because I know what the Speyside barrels are doing, and I mostly know what the tequila barrels are doing. I've only had like 1 or 2 that were aged, but I can at least picture that. What does a Hungarian barrel do?
I'll have a better sense of that because we're going to put some single barrels into Hungarian oak, and then we'll have the ability to sort of monitor it over time and see what's really happening. Based on my conversations with distillers who have been aging these things and have more experience than I do, but also with the whiskeys that we've sampled that have been aged in Hungarian oak, because batch 4, one of the primary corn components is aged in Hungarian oak. And so the experience we've had with everything aged in Hungarian oak is a lot of concentration of wood sugar, like a lot of concentration of woody notes and sugar notes, and a little bit less tannin. So, I've heard it described as a tighter grained. But even if it's really tight grained and has a ton of concentration of wood sugar, you'll get kind of the sweet without the overly tannic.
I was a little worried that that's exactly what would happen to it, because just thinking Hungarian, like it sounds like it's concentrating on the oak, which is going to give you an oakier whiskey. So that's what I was a little worried about. Yeah. Hey, so what kind of savage are you? Did you just take a sip without?
Sorry.
All right, stream over. Nick, get out of here.
Start over. Oh, man, I gotta.
All right, that's well. Cheers. Cheers to Dutch 3 and 4.
Cheers. I just took a sip.
You'll never do that again on my stream, though.
Oh God, I can't. Cheers. Happy New Year. Way to start it off. Oh man, no, that's hilarious. Yeah, no,
hold on. We gotta appreciate. We have to appreciate. So appreciate. I'm trying to think of what I've never had anything like that before. Not even the first one.
Yeah,
it's way sweeter than I would expect in a rye, but not to the point. Wait, hold on. So it's 32% corn. Okay, I was like, it's not. No way, it's 4%. It's 32% corn. So that explains it. But still, I guess it must be the Canadian rye as opposed to more like what is it? I always get this wrong. It's not Memphis rye. It's
what, the Indiana
Maryland rye.
Maryland rye.
Yeah. No, the kind there's two kinds that are in the U.S. Like Pikesville is one of them, but it's like a certain generality that they call that. Whatever, I'm not going to remember. Either way,
so
Canadian rye tends to be, at least in my opinion, sweeter. Of course, most people are going to think Crown Royal, and I'm not comparing this to Crown Royal, but Crown Royal is a very sweet rye. If you get the Northern Harvest, for example. But let me steer away from Crown Royal, because I don't even want to put this on the same. Now I'm insulting you. So
no, it's good. It's good.
But it's way smoother too. Now I know this is your lowest ABV of the 4.
It is.
But still at 55, 56, this is way smoother than you'd expect. Like this could be a problem.
All right, so there are 4 interesting things here. One, all right, so the ryes that I'm familiar with in the U.S. often fall into 2 categories. They're either a 51%er, where it's just like a barely legally rye, or the 95.5s, right? Which is 95% rye, 5% malted barley, and that's it. And the 51%ers you drink will be this incredibly sweet, as far as, particularly because they're required to be a new oak, right? So you're putting sweet on sweet, because 51% rye is the mash bill, and this is the complicated thing that I and it's why we usually call it a grain ratio and not a mash bill, because we're actually telling you the liquid ratios, right? And liquid ratio versus mash bill is actually very important, because if you take the same amount of rye and the same amount of corn and you distill them separately, you'll get a lot more alcohol from the corn than from the rye. If you take equal amount of corn and equal amount of rye in terms of the grain and you put them in a mash bill, you're still going to get way more corn alcohol than you are from rye. So 51% rye in the US is still corn dominant. It's still you're getting way more out of the corn than you are from the rye. And so there are sort of your sweeter ryes. Now Canadian rye is really confusing, because if you look back historically, the Canadians started adding rye into the blend, very much for the same sort of reason that reason that Americans did, because the Germans told them to. And basically, right, like Jim Beam is a German, right? That's the famous James Johannes Bochum was his father, right? They're Germans.
No, it doesn't sound German at all.
Doesn't sound German at all. And what's important about that is they started adding a little bit of rye, and they called it rye. And so the legal designation for Canadian, I don't know if it needs to have any rye at all to be able to be called
I
Canadian
remember
rye.
reading that. It really
I
was
think
more
it just
just a
has
generality,
to have the
like
suggestion of it, right? It's like similar to gin. Technically, doesn't have to have juniper in it. It just has to taste like juniper, right? It's kind of the same. It's kind of the same idea. And so for us, that was a tricky brand and product decision. Was like, how do we describe the mash bill? Because it's not a mash bill, but we want to be really upfront about the grain ratio, because we want people to know, like, this is a rye in the sense of American rye, in that it's more than 51% rye. But on top of that, it's actually, this will be even less sweet than you'd think, despite the fact that you're tasting sweetness, because this is the liquid amounts. In a mash bill, this would be more like an 80% corn, 15% rye, if you did it in the American terms. And so this ends up having quite a bit of rye grain alcohol in it, which is just so convoluted and confusing. But the honestly,
well, actually, I don't think it's that confusing.
Yeah, go ahead.
Only because, so I mean, I've complimented you before on this, and I'm glad that you kept doing it, putting the sorry, what you call it, grain ratio, like right on the front of the bottle, right? Like knowing what is in there. I mean, everybody who is in this chat right now is somebody who would appreciate the fact that that's on the front of the bottle. And and just, it's a bit of an anecdote, but like, I've been in Julio's and I've been looking at random whiskeys, and I have actually pointed people towards Found North, because of course I have. But and then they see the price and they're just like, oh, they walk away with an Evan Williams, right? And I'm like, well, not the target market. But one thing, that this is kind of another aside, but so this, but for the audience. So my dad randomly sent me a text message one day with a picture. He had bought both of these. But the batch 1 and batch 2. And he's like, hey, have you ever heard of this Found North? They're really good. You should try them. And of course, this is like maybe 2 months or maybe even longer after I'd had you on the stream and we were already doing this thing. And it's funny because my parents actually tend to watch the videos. And then he proceeds to tell me about, I forget, I don't think it's your is it your dad or somebody that my dad knew that is either related to you or somehow adjacent to you. I can't remember.
Oh my God, I remember this.
Yeah.
We
and he was just like, oh, you know Nick. I was like, yeah.
Oh God,
he's been on the stream.
Really
he's
funny.
like, oh, tell him I know his dad or whatever it was, And I'm like, this is a weird connection.
Yeah, God. Yes. All right, continue.
Yeah, well, no, it's just more. I've tried to point people. So I saw our who was it? David was trying to say, like, somebody talked me into buying batch 2. The reason I bring this up is my personal favorite of the first 2 batches was batch 1. But more people, as you were kind of alluding to, liked batch 2, if I remember correctly, right? That tended to be the popular one. So, I mean, David, for that price, like, first off, it's limited supply. It's going to go away. So for what it's worth, I would suggest it. If you can make it work, you're going to be happy about it. So.
Well, so it's funny to when we made the first label, we tried to put all the maturation on there. It was the ugliest label you've ever seen. Because it was just all writing, right?
Right.
And it became very much a marketing. This was very much sort of a threading the needle kind of experience, because we really wanted to indicate and tip our hat to the American whiskey consumer who. To those of you who are really familiar with Canadian, like, I tip my hat to you, but for the most part, like, American whiskey drinkers often don't know much about Canadian whiskey. And so there was a lot of, like, we really want this to be a product that is consumed by American whiskey drinkers, because we blend it to that palate. And we blend it to our palate, which is American whiskey.
Right.
And so there was a lot of things where we wanted to be sort of indicative of, like, hey, this is American, right? Here's a grain bill, at least, or something that is familiar with you, right?
Right.
Here are wax tops. This makes sense to you. But at the same time, we really didn't want to be deceiving about the origin of the liquid. And honestly, we really
no way you could.
Says, right? I mean, it says origin Canada. That was
origin Canada. Yep. First line.
Right. It was like first line. But at the same time, we didn't want to call it Canadian whiskey, because there are certain expectations with Canadian whiskey. And if there's Canadian whiskey that tastes like this, someone send it to me because I'm dying to try it. But really, this is just not really the style that they tend to make. And so the interesting thing was trying to put enough information on there where we were and the right information on there, right? And it's like, and if you want to know more, we publish all of it on the website, right? We say like exactly what the hell is in it, why we made it, everything. And transparency was, for us, wasn't a like distinguisher. You know what I mean? Like it drives me nuts when people are like, I tell you what's in it, I'm the best. And it's like, no, that should sort of be the standard.
Right. Totally.
But for us, it was also like, how do we present the information in a way that gets people to knowing whether they want to buy our product or not, which has been the most difficult thing, to be honest, because we love the liquid. It's just about figuring out how to get the right people trying it, the right people buying it.
Well, it's something I've always liked about Bruichladdich too. They almost take it to the nth degree as far as letting you know what's in the bottle that you're drinking. Not even, whatever. It's for those that don't know, they have a little thing that you can scan on the back and it will bring you to their site and it'll show you everything that's in that exact bottle.
Westland's like that too.
What was that?
Westland as well is like that,
yes.
which is interesting because they're imported and partly owned at least by the same company. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like very terroir and transparency driven companies. Yeah,
that's right. They were big in that whole symposium.
Brands. Yeah.
That was an interesting listen. I forget if it must have been a video or something. But I remember listening to those guys talk about it. Oh, maybe it was on
Are you thinking of the
Mark
Hoffman's
Gillespie's show there? The whiskey.
Oh, Mark Gillespie's. He did some great stuff. Yeah, I if you ever get a chance to watch the TED Talk on that Matt Hoffman did on grain and on Westland and basically like farming, agriculture, and just I think he's just one of the most fascinating dudes. Yeah, that's worth a look. And anybody in here probably who's interested in whiskey, which I'm just guessing is all of you, might enjoy it.
They're not here for like my looks. It's not.
Oh man. But back to this particular whiskey. When we made one part of that whole like we're Canadian but we're not Canadian thing was there's a perception that Canadian whiskey is very soft. I guess is the sort of like gentle, which is not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I would agree.
But we wanted to make like in your face big boy rye. And
it shows really too, just based. I mean, the fact that you didn't even compromise on the ABV either, like it totally makes sense. You're attempting to do something like
we put cask strength in the title.
Right? Yeah, you sure do. But
so with one we were going for kind of as spicy and cut you right to the core as we could, while still sort of walking the spice astringency tightrope. So basically, whenever we've blended any rye ever, we've found that rye. So just to be clear, making batch 1 and 3 is so much harder than making 2 and 4. I can't even begin to tell you, because rye, the things that we like in rye, cut both ways. So like the more spice you get, the more it cuts you with astringency, right? So for those of you who want to know what I'm talking about with astringency, it's the sensation that somebody put a cigarette out in the back of your throat, right? It's that burning, cutting bite.
You've always been way better than me at descriptors. That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, very elegant, right? And all of us know what it feels like to have a cigarette put out in the back of our throat.
Of course, but you pay for that,
right? You gotta pay extra. But no, it's very cutting, right? It's dryness that's sharp, not dryness that's tannic and pleasant. And the spice, all that spice, brings all of that astringency. And so batch 1 was very much about like, how spicy can we make it, and then what can we add in there from a corn and from just the combination of rye we were using and the ratios to basically thread that needle of, hey, this is a big spice bomb, this is a fuck you whiskey, like this is something that is going to be great for the dead of January, which we're
Yep.
about to be in, and not sort of teeter over into that like, wow, this is really cutting flavor standpoint. With batch 3, the thing that we noticed when we started blending this with batch 1 was there's actually a lot of fruit notes in rye if you let it age long enough, which pretty much never happens because nobody's been making rye for the last 20 years. It's only been the last 10 years. And so you don't have that much old rye. And so we don't often experience the sort of what happens over a longer period of time with oxidation with some of these rye components. And so with batch 3, we really wanted to sort of show the other side of the coin, right? We really wanted to explore some of the fruitier, more floral notes while still having that underlying rye spice. It's a rye, it's gas strength, it has a lot of meat on the bone. But I was really pleased the second you tasted it, you're like, I haven't tasted a rye like this. And that's what we were going for. We really wanted to make a rye where you sit there and honestly, that's always our goal. What the hell is the point for us of making whiskey from a different country that is supposed to taste different and not have it taste different, right? But at the same
not
time,
only that, but like,
why
enter the playing field if you're not going to do something worth being there for? You don't want to come in being like, hey, this is a 95.5. It's like, what's the point?
Right.
So
what's the point? Right. And so I think for us, the ex tequila barrels that we used were super interesting. They were herbaceous, but they brought a lot of really funky fruit notes to the whiskey. And we built around that. The really interesting thing with the really interesting thing with rye that we found is it's very bimodal. And so it tends to have a lot of notes on the so it tends to have a lot of notes on the front end. So you get a lot of spice, you get a lot of fruit, you get a lot of wood, you get all these things that you want. And then there's kind of this like dip, this momentary, like if you're a music junkie, it's just like a hiccup in the rhythm. It's just like a sudden, you symphony, stop, play a different sound, right? There's this, it's bimodal. The flavors on the front end and the back end. And on the back end, you get all the astringency and the like warming spice and the tannins and sort of the back end of the rye. But the mid palate, when we were making this, we had everything we wanted on the fruit notes and everything we wanted on the finish. And it was this corn component that we used that was a 21-year-old corn aged in its entire life in used oak, in used American oak. And it was fascinating because it didn't hammer the tannins and the astringency. So it didn't really alter either end of the whiskey. If anything, it just added some meat to the middle.
Nice.
And that was really what we were trying desperately to find. And that was actually why this label has American oak listed as its maturation, because the Hungarian oak that we used. So we used a 25-year-old Hungarian oak in this, and it's sort of the foundation of batch 4. So I'll sort of carry this conversation right into batch 4. But we use this Hungarian oak, and again, intense wood sugars, really, really interesting for the back end of the whiskey. Kind of broad and molasses notes, kind of concentrating the sugary characteristics of the fruit, which is one of the reasons why it's sweet, frankly. But didn't give anything into that sort of that backbone. And so there was a lot for the backbone that 21-year-old corn component did. And I just, it's funny when you said like, oh, it's sweet and it's smoother than the other one. And I think it just created a much more sort of uniform flavor, right? And like when you're blending, you're dealing with all of these things that have different peaks for when the flavor is sort of at its maximum, right? And so you can imagine how easy it is to make a really disjointed whiskey. I totally could see that. Good whiskeys. I've made 4 good whiskeys and about 4 fucking 100,000 bad ones. I can't tell you how many bad whiskeys I've made. Fortunately, fortunately we don't bottle them.
Right.
But really, it's very interesting trying to get all those pieces to fit together so that you have a much more sort of even, continuous, but always evolving flavor profile. And that was what we tried to do with batch 3. And I think it came out well. I honestly, like, we get asked all the time, what's your favorite whiskey?
Whichever one you're working on, right?
Yeah, right. And
Yeah.
it's like that. One was one of my favorite whiskeys ever, just that I've ever had, but because took me and Sammy and Zach 9 months to make it.
Right.
But honestly, 3 is the one that I think I'm most proud of, just because we made something that's really a really unique and differentiated rye. We made something that's showing a side of rye that I think really should be explored more. But I think it still holds that, like, that rye backbone, that spice, that grain that we actually like in a really pleasant way. Which,
well, I have a couple comments about
yeah,
that. Sorry to cut you off. Two things.
No,
Number one, just with David's question here, let me understand. Batch 1 rye or batch 3 rye used tequila barrels. So I think you were saying batch 3.
3.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
I couldn't think whether batch 3 or 4 was the one that used it. Okay, cool. So after drinking this first one, just because, I mean, we've talked before, I could listen to you just talk about whiskey forever, because I always feel like I learn a lot whenever we do these streams, which is awesome. But so as I'm drinking this, right, I don't recall a finish that is this long ever. Like, it just forever. And I'm having almost deja vu. I might have said the same thing about batch 1. Maybe I feel like I said that the last time that we talked too, is that it had, there was something I said, I'm not going to recall, but there was something I said that got the same kind of reaction where you're like, that's exactly what I was going for. But either way, so the finish on this is really cool. But what I'm noticing that's really neat is it's just sitting on the tip of my tongue, and it's just tingling like this entire time, which is weird because, I mean, I drink cast strength whiskey frequently, like very frequently. And so I'm very used to the feeling, and typically it sits in the back of my throat. This one's sitting on the tip of my tongue, which is about as far away as you can get. Is there any reasoning behind that you can explain, or is that just how it came out?
Yeah. So I just saw, I cracked up a second ago because I saw Nathan Tuck's comment. I like Nick's enthusiasm, but does he ever stop to breathe? Not the first time I've ever been asked that.
You guys will notice I tend to cut off Nick, and I'm not being rude. It's an agreement we've had.
No. It's an agreement we've had. Otherwise, these things would go for like 6 or 7 hours. And if you get me talking about whiskey, I literally won't stop. I've done tastings where 6-7 hours in, I'm just
everybody's just hammered and sleeping on the table, and you're like, now let me tell you about.
Exactly.
And I'd be like, tell me more. This is awesome.
Yeah. No, honestly, I only do it for people who are like you, right? Who are sitting there going, oh, okay, bring it on. But no, it's a really good question about the finish, and part of that is just that the components are old. And from a chemical standpoint, it's taken me a long time to really understand the importance of oxygen. And not to say that, like, I didn't know it was important, but to understand why. And I still don't think I have it right. Whiskey is not one of those things where, like, if you want to study mathematics, there's like, this is it. This is how math works, and that's it. Whiskey doesn't have like a textbook that is accurate. I will say that at least. And so I've sort of parsed together explanations from one PhD, master distiller from the next that I've encountered over the years. And my understanding of what happens chemically with oxygen is the charcoal on the inside of the barrel polarizes the oxygen, which basically means, like, it steals an electron. And so it makes the oxygen much more reactive, because the oxygen's very, very, very stable. And so the charcoal basically makes the oxygen very reactive. And then the oxygen starts reacting with different compounds that are in the whiskey, forming these different longer chain alcohols, basically. And what we have in our saliva is an enzyme that will break down our food, right? When you're in, I don't know about you, but when I was in 6th grade, we did the saltine thing, which is they hand you a saltine and they say, okay, chew it until it gets sweet, right? And what's happening is you're chewing it, and the saliva is breaking down the carbohydrates into simple sugars and it's getting sweeter. And
Oh,
then all of a
interesting.
sudden everybody goes, whoa, how did my salty stuff
No, I
taste
never
sweet?
did that, but
Uh,
that totally makes sense. Like I was fairly decent at chemistry, so this is all actually
It makes
very
sense,
sounding very
right?
familiar.
I
So this
was
is
bad
cool.
at chemistry. It took way longer to learn because of that. But basically, my understanding is you with really old whiskeys, really old whiskey. I mean, if you taste something that's like 45 years old,
Mm.
you will taste it on your breakfast tomorrow. And my understanding is that those really long, sort of complex compounds that are formed over periods of exhaustive oxygen sort of polarizing and binding with different things become much more difficult for your saliva to break down and for your
Okay.
palate to basically change and alter. And so they sit and they slowly change on your palate. Now, that could be what it is. That's an explanation that
I
a
know what you're saying.
very
I don't
famed
think that's what
master
it is.
distiller gave me. But
Yeah.
I have no idea. I
Yeah.
will say that the older the whiskey I've ever, whether it's been older whiskey that I've played with or older whiskey that I've drank, the
Mm.
older the whiskey, usually the longer the finish. And
Yeah.
that's pretty standard.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, I don't think the tingle is what that is. It very well could just be that this is my first drink of the night and it was cast strength. But regardless, this would often be what I mean, I would pick something like this as my first drink of the night. So it's a relatable concept. But yeah, I don't know. I'm dying to get into this batch 4.
So
But for anybody, I mean, well, let's see what we go through batch 4 and then I'll kind of go. But this rye is fantastic. I'm a huge fan of ryes, especially ones that aren't just like almost gimmicky about it. You know, if what am I trying to say? So, well, let's take the obvious one, right? Like Bullet, right? 95.5. When
yeah,
I first tried that, I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of cool. But actually, Bullet is very smooth for what it is. But it also is like, oh, this is a single note of what rye could be. And then I tried Pikesville, and that kind of quickly became my favorite rye that I had. And then I tried New
great.
Riff, and I tried a whole bunch of these different ones, and I've realized that you have a spectrum, just like bourbon, where you have people that focus on a single note, or you have people that focus on complexities or whatever smoothness. This one is, as I said, it's just very unlike any other rye that I've had. And before we're done here, I'm actually going to try it against the batch 1 just to see if they are. I mean, they're very close in the grain. What's the word you use? Grain
Grain
grain ratio.
ratio is
Thank you.
similar.
The grain
Some of
ratio.
the components are similar,
So
but
it'll
they're
be
completely
interesting to see
different.
if they're similar. Now I have very rarely touched these since the last one we talked because I don't want them to be gone. And I kind of want to like 3 years from here now I want to have like batch 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9. I just want to have all of them. So we'll see what happens. All right. Do you want to get into
Thank
batch
you.
4?
Yeah, I'm dying to get into batch 4. I'm really excited about batch 4. Let's pour it first.
Let's see what I can do with the pop this time.
Hey,
it's a little
a
better.
little slosh, but a little.
It was a good slosh. You're right. I was a lot better with the wax this time around. And your hey, pull it to the left, you idiot. Like that was good. So
it helps. Yeah.
All right.
I can't wait for you to put your nose.
Actually, before I do this, let me have some water here. And I should probably take a sec to say hi to people. So Matt from Whiskey Crusaders, he's going to be on at 10 o'clock doing a just kind of an overview of the Whiskey Advocate Top 20, which I would like to get your opinion on. If you are you familiar with it? Did you look at it?
I haven't read it. I haven't read it this year. I'm looking it up right now though.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, why don't you look that up while I'm doing this, because I'd love to get your opinion, because I have opinions. And actually, Matt, I'm gonna end up watching your stream to some degree here, because I'm definitely interested what your opinions are. Matt probably has every single whiskey on that list, so it'll be interesting to hear. All right, so Nathan Hector, hey Hector, you're from Massachusetts. Where about? Nick's from Massachusetts as well, so.
Yes, I'm in Massachusetts right now.
Right? Yeah, I know. We were originally talking about doing this one in person, and then
I know, but it's got a little crazy.
Actually,
it was crazy.
It was good that we didn't end up doing this anyway, because I have a couple of close contacts that we dodged two separate bullets. So my niece's birthday is January 1st, and I didn't go to the party that she had. And then my sister, who her mom just tested positive, and then my we have a couple close friends, and their daughter just tested positive. But like 2 days ago, we were like, thankfully we were busy, but we were going to hang out with them. But then we were like, we're busy doing something else. So we dodged that bullet too. So yeah, I mean, it would have been, I would feel incredibly bad if somehow I got you sick and you couldn't smell.
Yes.
Oh my God.
And that's funny because we canceled our travel plans. Not out of a lot of caution, actually, in large part because it would be a disaster if I lost my sense of smell.
Oh, for sure. Oh my gosh.
5 and 6 would be delayed. No, it would not be a good thing. No, I will say that the silver lining for this whole crazy COVID thing has been that we can do this and hang out even if we're not in the same room. This has become much more sort of normalized, and whether you hate being on video chats or not, at least for Whisky, it's been fun for me.
Totally.
Nathan,
so,
there are a couple stores in New York that have it.
He's in North Carolina.
Oh, Jesus! I just automatically read that NYC. North Carolina. Okay, that's trickier. You must love the ABC. The North Carolina is, for those of you who don't know, is a control state. I went to school there, so it was a little. I remember the experience of being like, wait a second, why are all the liquor stores the same, and have all the same products?
What is your
website?
Just okay, yeah. So go to foundnorthwhiskey.com.
Foundnorthwhiskey.com.
Yeah,
and it will sit. We'll have a order online. It's more expensive because you have to pay the shipping. I'm sorry, and they take full margin. Some of these nice stores in Massachusetts are selling things cheaper. But I think we can ship to North Carolina. I'm not 100% sure. If you can't, you can definitely ship to South Carolina. I got a lot of family down there that orders it and gets it. So if you can find a way to sort of order it to Charlotte, or order it just to South Carolina if you're in Charlotte, and then you can go down because it's not that far to cross the border.
For any of you guys that are paying for any of you that are paying the shipping, just take advantage of it and order 2 bottles instead.
There you go. I love that. That's a good. We should do something about that. So to sort of jump into 4 here. We made 2. When we made 2, we were blown away by the components that were sent to us, the corn components. We kind of assumed, we knew that there was good rye in Canada. We had tasted American brands that were importing Canadian whiskey and calling it American rye, right? There are a lot of them. And it was easy to identify which were which. Some of them were more honest than others. But basically,
I know what you're talking about. I think a lot of these guys do too. Yeah.
Try not to just burn everybody, but you know what I mean?
Alberta is a thing. Yeah.
Alberta is a thing. Yeah, exactly. And so we were sort of, we didn't know what to expect with the corn whiskey, particularly because in Canada they call it base whiskey, which is like the biggest turnoff ever.
I know it sounds like neutral grain. It's like why would I bother?
Garbage, right? You're like, why would I bother? I have no interest in that. And it's like, cool, 80% of the stuff is base whiskey, and you're just like, I'm not interested. And then they sent us some of these corn components that are technically like base whiskeys. And
is base whiskey like pumpkin spice flavored? Is that how that works?
Right. Exactly.
That's basic whiskey. Sorry, no.
So basically, we had to be talked into the corn components, and they sent us corn components for batch 1 because we kept trying to make 100% rye, and it was just too astringent and out of balance. And we tasted one of the corn components. We were like, holy cow. And I won't give you the whole story, but we ended up making batch 2 because of that corn component. And then when people liked it, we went back to a bunch of different distilleries in Canada and said, what do you have? What's available that we can play with? And we got sent a 1996 25-year-old corn component aged in Hungarian oak.
Okay.
And we had obviously had a lot of fun with the rye aged in Hungarian oak with batch 1. And we were intrigued, to say the least. And we just, once we sort of knew what was possible with these corn dominant whiskeys from Canada, it was like, you're like, I can't. We've already made batch 6, which is hilarious. Like,
Mhm.
we got into it so
That
much
is
that we
funny.
already made.
Yeah.
We haven't
Wow.
made batch 5, but we made batch 6 already, because it was just like, the corn was so fun to play with. I mean, and it's like getting to make bourbon, but we don't have to follow the rules. We don't
It's
have to put
interesting.
things in new oak.
Think about a 25-year-old corn whiskey in the Hungarian oak that we talked about earlier. Like, I can totally picture, even though I have, a good chunk of it, I could totally picture what that would taste like. Just, it sounds delicious, honestly. I thinking about the sweetness kind of just being cut by some of the more sweetness, really, from the barrel and everything with it. I've got to learn more about
Well,
barrels. Just
it has a molasses effect, right? So it intensifies the sweetness with a very sort of, it concentrates it, right? It's like concentrating the sweetness. And so your all your sort of caramel flavors that you'd expect in a bourbon,
yeah.
they manifest more as burnt molasses, as like, there's almost a rum note in there, right?
Mhm.
I've had a couple people say, I've had so many people say to me, you're gonna think I'm crazy, but I feel like this has like a slight agricole note to it, like rum agricole. And I'm
Okay.
like, no, not crazy at all. That's the Hungarian intensifies that sweetness so much that it tips into that, like, great dripping
Molasses-y. Yeah.
maple syrupy, just, and what's awesome about it is it didn't live in new oak first.
Mhm.
So it's not tannic, right? So
Yeah.
the problem with 20-year-old bourbon, and some people are going to just sit there and go, there's nothing wrong with 20-year-old bourbon, and I get that.
Mhm.
But the problem from a maker standpoint is that whatever they make, they have to end up with that sort of slight bitter oaky finish.
Mhm.
And I don't like that flavor
Yeah.
personally. I know some people get used to it the same way that Burgundy drinkers get used to the taste of manure, which is like famous in old, French Burgundy, which like doesn't do it for me.
Yeah,
I'm
no, it's not a
not a
very
Burgundy drinker.
appealing.
You know what it's not super appealing.
Yeah.
In the same way, I don't like the the kind of mulchy note that you get at the end of really expensive, really expensive old bourbons.
Mhm.
And so again, when we're playing with these Canadian components, we just don't have to play by the same rules. So we
Mhm.
get to make that style of whiskey, but we get to sort of bend the rules. And so when you drink this, you get the intense bourbon notes right off. The vanillins
Yeah.
and the caramel and the molasses and some really interesting sort of like candied fruit notes, things that we like in
Mhm.
old bourbon.
You
And
know, it's funny
but it's
because
just devoid of that last note.
let me jump in here for a sec. So
Yeah, go.
when I first opened up the bottle, actually, it's funny that you gave the notes in that direction because I had them the complete opposite. The first thing I was like, wow, this is really flowery. And then it got really fruity. And then it kind of, obviously it was just kind of some of the alcohol was evaporate, whatever. But like it was starting to get more like candy. And then it started getting more like caramel. And then as you were talking about molasses at that point, I was starting to get influenced by what you were saying. But I'm less like, this is interesting how it just changed from so light like a flower into caramel. Like that's a big transition for what 3 minutes 4 minutes that I've had this open. So pretty cool.
Yeah.
I'm dying to have this. So let's do this properly this time. So cheers
Yes.
to batch
That's
4.
hilarious. I already sipped on it because I kept talking about it.
You
Cheers,
son.
batch 4. I fucked this up again.
That's 2,
This is
Nick.
the
That's
problem of
2.
not being in the. This is the problem of not
I
being in
know.
the same room. You know what I
Totally.
mean? I'm looking at myself and drinking and reading the notes, and then I'm like, oh crap, I
Well,
screwed up
it's
again.
tough too because I don't want to interrupt because, like I said, I just like listening to what you're putting out there. But I'm just like, I need to interrupt so I can have a sip of this. Holy crap! By the way, wow, that finish was like that was delayed like 20 seconds. I took a sip of that and I was like, oh, this is pretty good. And then I started talking, and then oh, hello. I only took one sip, and it's still just sitting here. Actually, that's delicious. Let me think of how I would even articulate that. Give me a sec. I see what you're talking with. The deeper kind of molassesy, just is this the one that you were talking about with the rum, or was that batch 2?
No, this is batch 4. Batch 2.
Okay.
Batch 2 is a little bit more bourbony than this.
Okay, I was gonna say, because
go back to batch 2.
It's
just
hard
a
to
little
know
bit
if I'm
more
just,
like a bourbon.
it's hard to know if I'm just being influenced by what you were saying, but either way,
yeah.
I'm totally tasting what you were talking about with the rum note. Just it tastes molasses and deep, rich flavors that are. What else would this be like? This is, I mean, there's cocoa in there, like cocoa powder for sure.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Yeah. This is really delicious too. Damn it, man! How am I supposed to pick one? They're very different too, though. Actually, yeah.
Right. These are my children.
Like, I know.
And don't tell my wife I said that. And like these. Oh man, it is really hard to it's really hard to pick a favorite. And I will tell you, I like I had a breakdown while I was making these, just thinking they weren't going to be good enough to match batch 1 and 2. One of the really hard things that happens when you're blending whiskey is you're tasting the same whiskeys over and over and over again, and so it becomes sort of like reference based, right? You're like, oh, this whiskey is 10 times better than what I made yesterday, right? And you're like, so I think it's good. But at the same time, if what you made yesterday was horrendous, like you could still have made a bad whiskey, but you've been drinking the same thing for months and months and months. And so you get to the end and you're like, did I make a better whiskey, or did I try to get too cute with it? You know, and you start getting really in your head.
And you can't even back away from that. Like you can't take a week off and then come back and
pull yourself off of it. No. And I remember tasting a few people on 3 I was really confident in. I knew 3 was like, when we made 3, I was sure. But 4, again, I was just like, I don't know what to compare these to, because they're doing things that are bourbon-esque, but a little bit different, you know. So there's really not much of a category that we exist in, and so you're a little bit in a vacuum.
Well, it's funny that you say that.
I ended up loving it, and so it's like, yeah. Go ahead.
So I recorded 5 episodes yesterday. They weren't ones where I drank, which was good, because I learned that lesson early on. Like, I want to say maybe episode 6 through 10. I learned the lesson of filming more than 3 episodes at one time.
Good Lord.
And that was back in the day where I used to drink within the first minute, and then I would still make mistakes, so that I would have to restart, and I would drink again and just keep doing it. So, but anyway, I did. So today was like my top American whiskey of the year, which I didn't include your American whiskey in that one. I included it in a different grouping. So tomorrow's Irish whiskey, then Scotch, and then I included yours in like world whiskey. It was more just the miscellaneous, everything else that I did. And it's I mean, spoilers, I suppose, for whoever's watching, but I went over all of the different stuff, and then I saved Found North for last, and I was just like, okay, now let's just, all of this stuff is crap. Like these 2 here, let's talk about these 2. And then I pretty much just did like a Found North whiskey review. And so those they're so good, man. Like I'm almost sad that batch 1 wasn't 15 years, because then that would tickle the part of my brain that wants it to be 15, 16, 17, 18 too. But
people keep asking if we did this on purpose. You know, are we going to keep going up in increments? No, the answer is absolutely not. It was not done on purpose. The whiskey for us drives the age, not the other way around.
That's how it should be. But yeah, I did wonder that myself. I was like, they're getting better.
Yeah. So like people have asked us like, oh yeah, so you got like a little more expensive, you know, like because they're they're $5 or $10 more expensive. And it's like, well, you got older, but you got a little more expensive. And it's like, no. We literally, like, we take our costs, we add a consistent margin, and that's it. Right? It's like Johnny Ballgame.
And that makes sense. And I love that you're
And
doing.
I like that.
I love that you're doing. I mean, it's a premium product for sure. So it really is going to appeal to people where the difference between 120 and 130 is not like that's not the deciding factor. You know, it's
Right.
yeah. Now, how many bottles of each one of these did you do?
Good question. Yeah, so we doubled production.
Okay,
So
nice.
the 1 and 2 were 1,300 bottle batches. And if anybody's wondering, like, why the hell would you do a 1,300 bottle batch? It's because when you buy liquid in bulk, which is what we're doing, right? We aren't, in case it
Mhm.
wasn't clear with our name again, Found North. We didn't distill any of this. All the time, people are like, "How old are you? How did you
I know,
distill
right?
something 18 years ago?" It's
Well,
like,
when I was about 12, I was putting whiskey in
when I was
barrels.
12, I
I
like
knew
fell in love
someday.
with whiskey. Yeah, someday. No, the um, God, I totally lost my train of thought with
Um,
that.
why would you do 1,300 bottles?
Yes, yes. Sorry, thank you. When you buy in bulk, you're often buying in 1,000-liter totes,
Mm.
right? And 1,000-liter tote will give you about 1,300 bottles.
So
And
they
so
actually ship it
we
to
did.
you in totes, not in barrels?
They ship it to you in totes. Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's
Okay.
interesting if you look at if you really got into the nitty gritty of
Yeah.
batches 1 and 2 versus 3 and 4. You'll notice that batch 1 and 2 says bottled at I believe it says bottled at Red Hook Distillery, which is hilarious. Just a
Mm.
distillery in Brooklyn,
Okay.
New York, not the not the famous Red
Yep.
Hook bottle.
Distilled in Canada,
And
bottled in
then
Red Hook Distillers, Brooklyn, New York. Yep.
yeah, and then the new one says distilled in Canada, bottled by Found North Whiskey in Dover, New
Ooh.
Hampshire. We love our former partners at in Brooklyn. So this is nothing against them. We need more space
Yeah.
because we not only sort of bottled these in the new warehouse that they built,
Mm.
but we've actually started doing our own single casks, which has been kind of the most exciting. We'll start doing single barrels this year, with assuming the whiskey's ready. Again, everything dictated by the whiskey. But the hard thing is, people have asked us, "Hey, can you do single barrels? Can you do single barrels?"
Right.
And of course, when you're blending components,
Right. Yeah, that's a weird ask
you
for
can't
this
do a single
particular
barrel, right?
model.
It's a weird because it's like shit.
Yeah.
How do you give somebody a single barrel? So what we did was we actually blended a whiskey, and we'll see if we were any good at this. But we blended it such that we thought it would take oak well,
Mhm.
and then we put an entire two totes. We put 20 some odd barrels initially into warehouse, um, all different types of wood. So
Okay.
we really, the idea was like, let's make a canvas that will take paint really well. And then
Okay.
let's
That
use a
makes some
bunch
sense.
of different paint and see what the hell happens, you know?
Yeah.
And so
That's really weird though.
that's really exciting.
That would be like going to barrel bourbon and being like, "Can I do a single barrel?" Like, that doesn't make any
I did
sense.
that actually. When I worked at Gordon's, I did the first ever barrel bourbon single barrel
That's really
of batch
how does
when they
that
did
doesn't make any
batch
sense to
two.
me. Yeah. That
Yeah, so it was hilarious because I remember Joe Beatrice came into Gordon's when I was working there, and I was like, "Yeah, hey, so can I do a single barrel?" And he was like, "Of what?"
right? Yeah. It's like,
I
"Hey,
was like,
Johnny Walker, can I do
I
a
want to
single
do. I
barrel?"
was like, I don't care.
No?
Like I want to do a single barrel. And he was
Yeah.
like, all right, well, I'm bottling up batch two right now. I'll send you
Wow,
barrel
you got
samples
in there
from all
early.
of them, and you just pick the one you like the best. So I still have it on my shelf somewhere. I have barrel 13 from Barrel Bourbon, literally 13.
Dang.
Was the single barrel pick I did from them. Uh, and that was with Ken Gordon, and he and I were just, it was hilarious because they were
I think
like,
I finished it.
he was like, wait, you're sourcing sourced whiskey? I was like, yes, I am, but it's okay because like
Yeah.
you guys pick great stuff. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, we wanted to go a slightly different route with that. We wanted it to, rather than being like, and with bourbon you can do that because bourbon's a finished product.
Right.
Canadian whiskey is not a finished product. If I sent out a single barrel
Makes
of
sense.
one of our rye components, people would be like, this is horrible. Well,
Yeah.
I don't think it would be
Well, it's only
horrible,
a
but they'd
part.
sit there
Yeah.
being like, this is out of whack. And that's honestly kind of the fundamental difference between American and Canadian whiskey, which
Mhm.
is American whiskey, the flavor decisions are made at the beginning of the process. in Canadian whiskey, the flavor decisions are made at the end of the process,
Mhm.
right? So they basically are trying to make as many different flavors as they can so that you can blend them at the end. Whereas American, it's like, let's make all of the fermentation, grain bill, and barreling decisions based on where it is in the warehouse. Let's do all of that right at the beginning, and then not change. And then at the end, you go and you say, "This is what I want." Right? With Canadian, it's not like that at all. They're like, "Hey, we make a million things.
Right.
Make a
Pick and
whiskey out of
choose.
that."
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I found
Exactly.
the first time I realized that was a thing, I was doing a episode on 40 Creek where I was reading about
Cool.
how I was just like, that's legal in Canada. That's kind of cool.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I still to this day, like 40 Creek was okay, but I still to this day have a hard time really getting into any Canadian whiskey. Yours
Mm.
notwithstanding, that this is a whole different ball game, right? But the stuff that you
It's a
buy off
different type of whiskey.
what was it? Yeah, exactly. Like this is not something that you just normally buy. Um, and it's cool to me that Canada kind of had that built in that, hey, do whatever you want. Like here's all the parts, and it's totally legal and classified as Canadian whiskey to do whatever you want.
Yes.
Which is funny because American whiskey only started doing that in the last few years. Um, at least
Uh,
to the public knowledge
I mean,
anyway.
if you want to have me on for another hour, I can explain all of it. Would you like? You want to spend the next 2 hours going out over Canadian and American whiskey history, and then we can talk about. Oh man, we can talk about Sinclair Riding the Jungle and how that affected Taft's decision about what's legally bourbon. I mean, we could really get deep.
You know what?
Yeah,
I
no,
will take a
that
rain
is
check,
the
but I
fun
will
stuff.
actually I think we should make that happen. Maybe we can figure out a few bottles of that I could pick up where we could talk
I'd
about
love
some
that.
stuff.
We'd have a blast,
I
actually.
think so too.
Honestly,
'Cause
I think the most interesting presentation that I do, because as you know, I've done like a million of
right.
other type of whiskeys and spirits and stuff in my past. But I think honestly that the American whiskey and the North American whiskey presentation I do is for people who like American whiskey, it's just so fascinating because you start seeing how entangled the two industries are,
Yeah.
the Canadian and American, and then you start realizing that like, hey, guess what? 200 years ago, you didn't have to show your passport. Like you didn't have to cross the border or go through border security. You wanted your house to be over there, it's in Canada. You want it over there, it's in the US.
Right.
Like it really wasn't that and so the industries have started out just being completely entangled, and then they kind of got completely divorced, and now I actually think they're starting to move back close to together in terms of so much of the stuff is being sourced from one or the other,
Mm,
and the sort of overlap, the concept of North American whiskey is kind of coming back a little bit.
yeah.
So hopefully we drive that train a bit.
So let me ask you this. So uh
Yeah,
you're sourcing from Canada. Why is your stuff so
yeah.
much better than Whistle Pig?
Oh,
No, I'm just I
oh
was just
man,
I was sitting here thinking, I'm just like, why is
thank you.
Whistle Pig has just never done it for me. And I
That's interesting.
yeah, I at least not the stuff that I've tried anyway. It's been a number of years. I've had the 10, the 12, the 15. I haven't tried their farm stock stuff. But it just is a very, very different flavor than yours. And I'm sure that
The
that's
best
because
whistle
good.
The best whistle pig I ever had was the 111. Anybody who can get your hands on a 111, drink it because you'll enjoy
Yeah.
yourself. But
Actually, I have
but
had some of their boss hogs actually now I think about it. And they were good.
the,
But yeah.
the boss hogs were good. There have been some really good boss hogs. That they did it really early on, the 111, and I thought it was spectacular. But yeah, I mean, um,
You
it's
don't
partly
actually have
what
to
they
answer
were
that
trying.
question, by the way. I was just
It's
being a
partly
dick.
what they were trying to do. No. I like whether people like it or not. You know, there are people who
Yeah.
are gonna drink our shit and say Whistle Pig's better, and that's perfectly fine. Like, the point of
I would
whiskey
say
isn't
I would
isn't
question those
conformity,
people's
right?
sanity,
But
by the way.
thank you.
And
Because
just for anybody who's watching this in the future, like Nick didn't pay me off or anything like that. I truly just really, really like this stuff. And like
no,
when
I
I
mean
heard you
you
were
go
doing batch
back
3 and
and
4, I was like, please come on. So
no, I remember when I brought Old Pulteney onto your show
yes.
years ago when I was representing them, and you absolutely bitch slapped old Pulteney, like right on camera. I was like, oh, okay, like
Yeah, I
good.
know.
We're
I'm
having
sorry
an
about
honest
that.
conversation. No, no,
The
no, no, no. I
the
honestly, I like that a lot better. I'd much rather somebody give me like Lou Bryson. So for those of you who don't know, Lou Bryson is my favorite whiskey writer. He wrote Tasting Whiskey, which
Mhm.
like Lou did not pay me off. For all those people who have seen me for like 10 years tell everyone that the best whiskey book on the market is Tasting Whiskey.
Mhm.
Um, but Lou's been one of my absolute favorite whiskey writers for years. And I, of course, sent him samples when we were first making the stuff. And I remember I sent him samples and he called me and he goes, "Hey, this first thing you sent me is amazing. And the second one is garbage." And I was like, "Oh, okay, back to the drawing board, I guess." But no, honestly, you end up at Better Whiskey. I've got a call with
Mm.
him. I got a call with him in a couple of days to go over the new batches because
Nice.
he's just such a he's just an encyclopedia
Well,
of
if
flavor.
you ever need
But
a additional point of view, I'm available.
I honestly like very much would and appreciate your opinion on things I make in the future. So I'll send you some stuff.
So,
Because honestly, like
yeah.
it's I think that the hardest thing in this I think the hardest thing in this process is what I was talking about earlier, which is it's easy when you're in a room and you like something and everybody else around you is liking it
Yeah.
and you're like you feel a level of confidence. You're like, yes, this is good. The people around me think this is good. I think this is good. The smart person over there thinks this is good, right? Like it's very easy to have an opinion in that moment. When you are in this like total vacuum of I'm making this and nobody else is giving me any feedback, there's no security blanket of some smart whiskey person being like, yes, that's quite good. You like you sort of sit there and you get to the point where you're like, I just want anyone to taste it. Like I want
Yeah.
I mean I want somebody who's never had whiskey before to taste it. I will take any opinion I can get. And so to
Yeah.
get an educated opinion at any point in the process is actually super helpful. Whether they're
Yeah.
a reviewer like yourself, a whiskey maker, or just somebody who enjoys whiskey. When we made the first couple
Yeah.
batches, I sent them to like 10 or 11 just customer friends of mine and was
Mhm.
like, give me like pretty. And by the way, I sent them 5 whiskeys. The funniest thing was I sent them 5 whiskeys, 4 of which weren't mine, and one was mine. And I was like, give me notes on all 5 of these.
Yep.
It was amazing how bad my first couple whiskeys were because
I was
like
waiting to see
coming in
which
fourth
way that was
place
gonna go.
and like third place when you're putting in like pretty
Yeah.
baseline whiskeys, you're like,
Oh
God
man.
damn, okay, we're not
Oh,
even
that must have
close.
hurt a little bit.
Oh, it hurt.
Hey, by the
It
way,
hurt a lot.
I saw you're gonna be on with Scott in a couple of days.
Yes,
Yeah,
I
that'll
can't
be
wait.
cool. He's a great guy. Have you done
He's a really
a
good dude.
stream with him before?
I've done one. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
cool. Yeah, yeah.
I really enjoyed it. Yeah,
That's great.
not
I'm
as
glad
fun
you're
as you, but really fun.
I'm glad you're doing the whole campus though, because he definitely he gets different people than I do, and I get different people. So this is good. I mean, the more exposure, the better.
Well, I don't want to take up all your time. I don't know.
Yeah.
You always can cut me off whenever you want to. But I pulled up the top 20 whiskey archive.
Oh yeah, let's talk about it.
And
Yeah.
yeah, look, I've had the chance to taste a bunch of these.
Mhm.
Not all of them. And you know, I remember I remember talking to a whiskey, a really serious whiskey writer, and I won't blow up his spot because he'll
Sure.
lose his job. But basically, I was talking to him about um, uh, different companies, and he did not work for the Whiskey Advocate at the time. So
Mhm.
I'm this is not a dog on the Whiskey Advocate in particular.
Sure.
But I asked him about the Whiskey Advocate, and I said, hey, the Whiskey Advocate, like how when they do a top 20, how's that work,
Yeah.
right? Like are they and he said, and one of the things he said to me was he was like, look, if we review Ardbeg on page 4 and on page 5 and 6 we have a full page ad from Ardbeg, like that managing editor doesn't need to tell me. I know that I can't pan the shit out of Ardbeg,
Right.
right? And he wasn't saying like, it's all nonsense.
Right.
But he was like, if you
It's a
think there's
business.
not
You know?
politics
Yeah.
in this, and you think there's no business sense in what we pick,
Right.
then you're an idiot, you know. And I thought that was really fair, because we were on the conversation started because of hilariously because of the Crown Royal Northern Harvest Rye.
Yeah.
When Jim Murray named it the best whiskey in the world right after the Yamazaki Sherry Cask the year before, which was a
Yeah.
legit whiskey. And then the
Right.
Northern Harvest Rye, which is by no means a bad whiskey, but like
Yeah.
that's what you call best whiskey in the world. And then there was it started this whole conversation about like, are these reviews trustworthy, or are they paid for, or what's the deal? Is it
Yeah.
pay to play? Because there's a lot of that in the industry. And when you look at this top 20, I don't see a lot of bad whiskey on here, but I see a couple interesting kind of oddballs in here, but you're seeing a lot of the big boys well represented,
Yeah.
right? And
Well,
those are the ad payers, and you know, and so when I do something with you, or I do something with Scott, or I do something with somebody who their livelihood is not dependent on what they say about
right.
somebody big's whiskey, I actually enjoy it more, because I get more of an honest opinion about my whiskey, and you know, you tend to get a little bit more straight shooting, even if it's not the multi-million-dollar magazine company. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
it's a different experience, and I like
No,
that.
I'm totally with you. You know what I didn't love about the top 20 there is there was nothing. So like I remember last year looking at the top 20 and just being like, some of these are weird. Some of these are questionable, but like generally they're all fine, good whiskeys. This year I felt like it was just a very basic list. Like there was the Compass Box No Name 3. I haven't
I mean,
had it
there's
yet,
5,
but I've heard
right?
amazing things about that. And I think I refresh my memory. Is that like number 6 or 7, something like that? Like
Yeah, something like that. I can't even remember.
it's on the top row either way. It's in the top 10. But like that beat out Lagavulin 11, which I did go out and buy specifically because it got the top spot. And you know, I was trying to ride that wave of any sort of popularity, but I I like the Lagavulin 11 plenty, but I even without tasting it, I would almost guarantee you I'd like that Compass Box more. And I find their list interesting because I just didn't see anything on there that was like, oh, that's cool. I should go find my way and go buy that. It was all just like, oh, this is all mostly available. I could probably go buy almost every whiskey on that list. And I just
Right.
don't like if you're gonna do a top 20 whiskeys that came like of that year, it should be things that I can't get, and that's fair. Like I get that, and I can expect the fact that I can't buy everything that they get their hands on. I want to know what the best whiskey of the year was. I don't want to know what who paid the most. So
Right,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Two comments that came in. One, thank you, Nathan. Really appreciate it. I'm excited. Like, by the way, for anybody ever, my email address is nick@foundnorthwhiskey.com, or founders@foundnorthwhiskey.com, or team@foundnorthwhiskey.com. That shit all ends up in my mailbox. Nathan, would love to hear what you think about it. When you open it, tell me, because we take the feedback really seriously. Thank you.
yeah, no
The
problem.
second one was Saffrix. I think that's how you say it. I agree. The Northern Harvest Rye was good.
Yeah,
Just
I
to be
actually did like
very
it a lot
transparent, I
too,
didn't
but
mean to say it was a bad whiskey. I like very much enjoyed it. I just thought it was absurd to say it was the best whiskey that year. I had 20 whiskeys I liked better that year, that were all new. But I hear you. That was it. That was definitely a good whiskey. To sort of discuss more with you, Bill, about just it's a tough game, right? Because it's like, it is annoying when you see a list of the top 10 whiskeys of the year, and it's like Pappy, Stag, Weller, like
yeah,
birthday bourbon, and you're just like, cool, screw you. Like, I can't
yeah,
get my hands on that stuff unless I have just unbelievably deep pockets or I work in the industry. And
that's
so
a
it's just
fair point, actually. Yeah,
it's annoying. The long and the short of it is, if you're looking at a top 20 list from Whiskey Advocate, it's going to be an accurate representation of good whiskeys. There's no question. Is it going to be a blind tasting? You know what I mean? Where they
right.
just were like, hey, here's a 1-month project for our team. We're going to blind taste all the cool new whiskeys of the year. and give an honest sort of what our absolute favorite was in a vacuum without considering like who it's available to, who paid what this year for our subscription, for our ad dollars. Like you're kidding yourself. So for me, when I look at the top 5 on this, Lagavulin, Diageo, biggest company in the world. Maker's Mark, Beam Suntory, 3rd biggest company in the world, right? Like Teeling, owned by God damn it, somebody else huge.
Begins with an M, I think, right?
Yeah. Yes. Teeling.
Yeah,
Teeling. Whatever. You get my
this
point.
Is bad. Both of us are stumped on it. What the heck is
right?
the name?
Like you get the idea, right? Like this is a list that and even the funny thing is like
Bacardi.
I'm obsessed. Thank you, Bacardi. Yeah, I'm obsessed with Compass Box. I'm absolutely obsessed with Compass Box, and I'm with you. Like these first 10 whiskeys, if I had to grab one off the shelf to just buy sight unseen,
it's going to be the no name. Yeah,
it'd be the no name in a heartbeat.
Yeah, totally. Actually, it's
that
funny.
Being said, I love Scotch, so it's
like super early on. It was literally my first live stream. This thing's even dusty. I got a bunch of these like
sick.
Yeah, like a bunch of these pictures. I framed this one, and I have this little folder here. It's got a bunch of different ones in it as well, like things that aren't even made anymore. And I keep meaning to hang them on my wall. I need to get around to it. But Compass Box, I've just always been a fan of. It's funny how the what do you call it? How different blended whiskeys can be, especially scotches, right? Like you have the lowest of the low, or one of the lowest of the low, in my opinion, of Johnny Walker Red, and that is a blended whiskey or blended scotch. But then you have Compass Box, which is doing the same thing. It really just comes down to, we've got a whole bunch of stuff. Let's make something that everybody will be okay drinking, versus we've got a whole bunch of stuff. Let's make the best thing possible. So,
right. I'm obsessed. I'm, by the way, obsessed with Compass Box. I love a lot.
Do you have
of the
pretty much all of them? Like just
no, I not in the I have a bunch of them. Let's be real. I have a ton of them. And I remember the Flaming Heart, the 2nd edition was one of the first scotches I had where I was like, holy cow! And I was young.
Flaming Heart's awesome.
Flaming Heart's unreal. But just generally speaking, like John Glazier and what he did being, and also like, hey, look, he was an American who went into the Scotch industry and made sort of Americanized and American style blended Scotch. I mean, honestly, like if you think about it, his affinity towards Kleinleach, which is much sort of waxier and more texturous and more of the mouthfeel that I think Americans look for. His desire to make whiskeys that were a little bit bigger, a little bit more cask strength oriented, but also his attitude towards the sort of mainstream industry in terms of just being like, hey, guess what? I'm going to make blended Scotch premium for Americans and bring it. Is something that's very inspiring for a brand like us, right? I mean, there's very obvious parallels.
So I think Pitch Hitter here is sucking up to you a little bit, but I think it's pretty good.
yeah. Thank you.
What is the price range of No Name 3? I'm not sure. I want to say it's probably like 110-ish or so. That's what most of their stuff ends up being. So Brute, both of us are actually we're probably about 35 miles apart right now, maybe 40. We're both in Massachusetts. So I ended up just I poured batch 1 and batch 3 because I know we're probably a little over. We are definitely over time, but I should probably cut this off at some point. So I wanted to start with these at least. Boy, can I not pick
I'm doing the same thing.
Pick one that I like more. I've gone back and forth over and over and over again, but they both bring something different to the table. I think that actually, let me make sure this is true.
Make sure I'm not full of shit. Hold on.
I know, right? I want to make sure I'm remembering properly.
I do that all the time. Like, hold on. So, I talk so much. Sometimes I gotta just let my brain catch up with my mouth.
So when I first tried batch 1 again, at first I was like, oh, actually the flavor is a little bit more robust than batch 3. But now after having them a couple times side by side, I actually don't agree with that anymore. I feel like they're equivalent. Um, they're very similar though. I
It's called palate fatigue.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think that's the problem. Is I've had like 6 cast strength whiskeys at this point, so there's too much
So
going on. But either way,
yeah,
if you
so
liked
I'll
batch
tell
1,
you,
you're
I'll tell
bound
you
to
this
like
though.
batch 3. Um,
I
yeah.
think if you like batch 1, you're probably gonna like batch 3. To be and that's not that's not to say I think you can. That's not to say I they're indistinguishable. I just the interesting thing, Bill, is we drink like when we're blending and we're really getting into the last
Mhm.
days of it where we're trying to finalize the blends. We will drink 4 whiskeys at a time, period.
Yep.
And like yeah, and by the way, I do know biologically how this works, and this is science, and I am confident about
Lay
it.
it on me.
Like
I want to hear it.
the mechanics of palate fatigue are you have certain receptors,
Mhm.
and when they've received the signal that tells your brain what flavor it is, that when that molecule attaches to that sensory receptor, it
Mhm.
makes it very hard for a new molecule to attach to the same receptor,
Makes
right?
sense.
And so
Similar to the way that dopamine
what
works. Like you can, yeah,
right?
right.
Yes, exactly, right?
Mhm.
Okay.
See, I'm not. I
So
told you, I'm not.
so no, yeah,
Yeah,
and nailed it.
yeah.
So if you take whiskeys that are so it's very counter to what you would think, right? Like
Mhm.
when I first started getting into whiskey, I would read the tasting notes of something and it would say apple. And so I would smell an apple
Yep.
and then I would smell the whiskey and be like, why can't I taste the apple? You know, and it's like, yeah, because I just nuked my own ability to taste the apple.
That's
It's very
interesting. Yeah.
counterintuitive. You think like, oh, if I and it is to say like you in the same way you cannot change your sensitivity, your biological sensitivity to certain flavors. The
Mhm.
thing you can improve is your ability to sort flavors out, right?
Okay.
Your brain cells that are responsible for processing flavor
Mhm.
can evolve and can improve and can be trained. Your physical olfactory glands can't be changed, right? So certain people have biological sensitivities to things, right? You'll have certain people who can't taste something because they literally don't have a receptor for that thing. Me, hysterically, I have an enormous sensitivity to acetone.
Okay.
So basically, I have biologically expensive whiskey taste because acetone is like a flaw you find in cheap whiskey. But
Love
I
it.
can taste, I don't know what it is, but like I feel like I can taste 1 part per a million. If my wife does her nails
Yep.
near the house, I can smell it before I come into that. I mean, it's like
Okay. I can see that.
acetone just,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? It's just like,
Yep. Totally.
and
Yeah.
so for us, when you're tasting whiskeys that are very similar, when you're blending and you're tasting whiskeys that are really similar, for us, we found 4 tastes in your toast. And so
Mhm.
we're really careful about it. We prepare ourselves and we go, all right, what am I looking for? What am I trying to discern? Because you can casually talk with your nose in a glass
Right.
and nuke your palate and have no palate for the rest of the day. I mean, it's really, really easy to do that. And
Yeah,
so
I
when
could
you
see
start
that.
taking 2 whiskeys and you're 6 whiskeys in, and you're going,
Yeah, which one? And not only that, but you're usually doing exactly that. And there's no, like, you're mixing stuff. That's not giving yourself time to chill out. Yeah. Now,
yes,
do you
yes,
just? I've always heard that, like, if you kind of like smell your own arm or skin or whatever, like, I don't know if that actually works. I've never practiced it in a situation like this. Um, I don't know if do you have any tricks? Like, I've heard smelling like a bag of coffee beans can help.
yeah. I mean, I've tried every trick. For me, like palate cleansers have never worked at all.
Mhm.
I've never had any piece of food that's made it easier for me to tell what I'm drinking next. Like
Okay.
I've never, and I don't think it makes any sense,
Mhm.
right? Like I don't understand why if I have palate fatigue for this, which is an overexposure to this,
Mhm.
I don't understand why smelling some other molecule is
Right.
somehow going to
That's a good point.
erase the exhaustion of that receptor. And
It's kind of sounded like bullshit when I was reading it, but I was like, this is like the 18th time I've read this. It must be true, but that doesn't mean anything. It just means people are copying
welcome
each
to
other.
the whiskey industry.
Yeah, for real.
Right? Like if you're really serious about learning this shit,
Yeah.
you'll find a year and a half after you've been spewing. Like I did whiskey tastings for years where I said the wrong thing. And it's not because I was trying to be deceptive. It was because I read 15 books that all said X. And then I talked to somebody who was like, here's the science. And then it's like, does X make sense anymore or not? And you sit there and you go, no, it doesn't make any
not at all.
sense.
Well, actually,
right. And so it's like
something that you told me on our very first stream together, the one that you were actually in my kitchen, like that I think about all the time is when you were talking about the whole heat exchange between the barrel and the whiskey going into the barrel and coming out and having whatever effect that actually has on it. Do you recall that at all? Like,
yes.
Yeah. And just thinking about how many times I put that out there as absolute fact without ever really, which this is embarrassing because I actually really do research stuff before I do my episodes and stuff. And just the fact that one was like, oh, well, everybody says that's a thing. So like it's on every website. Like we put this in we leave the doors open to our warehouse so that the environment can just like, that killed me when you said that. And I was like, shit, have I been getting it so wrong like forever? Like
there's no heat change in a place like Taiwan. Why is it so extractive? Right? Well, because it's freaking hot.
Right.
And heat makes it way more reactive. I don't know what to tell you. It's not because
exactly. It's like physics is actually fairly simple when you sorry.
Is it right?
Yeah,
I know.
It's hot or it's cold. It's moving quickly or it's not. The molecules are excited or they're not. It's like
or they're not. Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yes. And I like it's I've had people tell me how companies do things like a devil's cut, and it sounds so sexy when you hear it, and then you hear how they do it, and it's like, oh, okay. So they just fill the barrel up with water, and that you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, oh, wow.
You mean the company found a way to squeeze an extra few pennies out of that whiskey that was actually still like adhered to the sides of the barrel?
Adhered to the side of the barrel, right? It's like, oh man, there's there's like an AT&T commercial where they talk about how they give their new and old customers the same deal.
Yep.
And it's like somebody at the executive team was like, hey, having different deals for all these different customers is too complicated for all our stores.
Yep.
So we need to figure out how to make everybody having the same deal sound really good. So what are we going to do? You know what I mean? And
right.
It's like a lot of the whiskey industry is like that, where it's like, hey, we do this kind of boring thing and we do it so that we can squeeze some extra dollars out of this. Like, how do we
then we give it a good name.
Yeah, we give it a good name, and and
like Angel Share probably came about as an excuse to the investors as to why they weren't getting as much of a return into the obviously the whiskey's evaporating, but they're like, oh well, yeah, of course that's the Angel Share. That's the sexy term that we'll put behind it. You're getting less for your investment out of our barrel because the angels. Yeah,
that's what they told their angel investors, right?
Yes, that's why it's called the Angel Share.
Angel investor. Exactly. You're wondering, this is the Angel Share. We've stored it away for you secretly somewhere else. We're gonna give it back to you at the end. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. It's there's an enormous amount of nonsense in the industry, and I think honestly, like some of it is conniving. You know what I mean? Like in any industry, there's whatever you want to call marketing. There's good marketing, there's bad marketing, right? And then a lot of it is honestly like you and me, who there's no whiskey book. Honestly, you can't. Yeah. The best one, I swear to God, is tasting whiskey. You want to fundamentally understand how whiskey.
I don't have them. I have just 2 books. I have Beginner's Guide to Whiskey and the Complete Whiskey Course over there. And those are the only 2 that I've read. Actually, this one's put up by another right there. another whiskey tuber who he kind of jumped in after writing the book, and he was like, "Oh, I should do whiskey reviews." Not as great at doing that, but the book is great, and I've recommended it a few times as well. But so it's called Tasting Whiskey by who?
Lou Bryson.
Lou Bryson. Okay, I will look that up.
Yeah, and I think I think when you start to get really serious about doing things like your YouTube and your live stream, or like me, you start trying to make whiskey, you really start to try to say like, oh, I'm going to say what is real, and I'm going to try to do that, and that's when you sort of dig a little deeper and you start going, oh, there's a lot of nonsense, and then there's a lot of like, oh, this actually makes sense, and you kind of have to just try on your own. I'm curious. I'm actually more curious what you think about 2 versus 4. If you have,
sure, I'll do that quick because I was actually I will absolutely 100% do this, and then I feel bad because I'm kind of eating into one of the other channels that I really like, and I don't want to take their.
Then cut me off before I drink.
Well, let's do this one, and we'll give this a max of 10 minutes, and then I'll
I was gonna give it 5.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't do live streams very often, so if I step on people's toes, I don't feel all that bad about it. So let's see. So I just did the 2 over here and the 4 over here, just so I don't get confused. All right, let me drink some water.
Mark, I agree with you. Fred Minnick is great. The closest thing there is to a history of bourbon is The Rise, Fall, and Rebirth of Bourbon by Fred Minnick. Phenomenal book. Also on Audible, which makes it much more consumable for me.
Oh, wow, these smell considerably different. Actually, oddly enough, the 4 I was getting almost like a smoky note, which I didn't get the first time I had it. I don't know. Maybe I'm crazy, but
no. So phenolic compounds, you obviously can get them from smoking the whiskey, smoking the grain.
Hold on. I want to tell you exactly what I'm getting, just in case this is where you're going. This smells like when you accidentally catch a marshmallow on fire. Is what that smells like.
Oh, that's fantastic. Are you talking about 2 or 4? Is that 2 that smells like the
sorry, that was number 4. But I didn't get that when I had it earlier. By the way, I did see at least 2 people have popped off at this point saying they're gonna walk away and buy a bottle. So I'm happy about that.
I noticed that, and I appreciate it. I appreciate it, guys.
These are great, man.
I'm obsessed with 2. I love 2 as like my 5th drink. Honestly, like it's not my favorite when I drink it first. It's it's 129.8 proof, right? So it's 64.9% ABV. It's an absolute hammer. And we joked that I actually joked with the guys on our team. San Francisco. So just to pat ourselves on the back, batches 1 and 2 both won double gold at the San Francisco World Spirits Competition, which is a blind tasting. And I joked that those guys had 10 whiskeys in a row, and then they tasted batch 2, and it was the only thing they could taste because they could taste it. So
I think
this one's good.
That certainly didn't hurt. I'm sure it didn't. Yeah. I wish I had done this at the beginning, because I'm like you said, palate fatigue. I'm tasting both of these, and I'm not sure which one I would pick. But all I know is my tongue is like burning. So
your tongue's on fire. I don't know. I think as my first pour, it would always be 4. Batch 4. I think batch 4 is fundamentally a better whiskey than batch 2, which is crazy to say because I'm obsessed with batch 2. And it was just so well received. But I think batch 4 is better. That said, like, there's something to be said for pouring yourself the 6th whiskey of the night, even if it's half-ounce pours. I mean, pouring the 6th thing you're trying of the night, and to be able to really like differentiate it and pull it out and be like, oh wow, oh this has, that is unusual, and batch 2 will do that for you. And I partly think that's why it's been so damn popular, is because people like drink their warm-up whiskey and then they go to batch 2 and they're like, oh shit. Whereas if you drink batch 2 first, it's it's such a full frontal assault of
Mhm.
like, I'm going to smash you in the face with bourbon flavors. I mean, I'm going to really bring the noise, which was again kind of the point of our first two batches. Batch 3 and 4, a little more finesse, a little more.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, these are very
Honestly,
different
a little
beasts.
bit more ability.
Yeah. You know what
Batch 1 and 2 are like, hey,
one
let's
thing I
make
think is
something.
awesome, and your story makes sense about how like you weren't planning on doing the second batch until you tried it, is just how completely different these whiskeys are from each other. Um,
1
and the
and
fact,
2 versus 3 and 4, and
well, not
the rye
more
versus the
like
corn.
1 and 3 versus 2 and 4.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, yeah.
just I mean they're
Yes,
different
exactly. That's what I
categories,
mean.
but
Yeah.
it's still like just very very different. Like one could have existed without the other, but instead you were just like, fuck it, we're doing both. So,
Yes.
um,
Yeah. Exactly.
I would have to say I know that you were just raving about two. I think of the two of these at my current burnt out palate level, I'm actually liking the 4 a little bit more, but I'm finding it funny how little of any nuance whatsoever I'm getting compared to when
In
earlier when I
either
was
of
like,
them.
oh, it started floral and then it started fruity and then it was candy and then it was caramel. Now it's
Yeah.
just like, good whiskey. So
Yeah. Right.
yeah,
I mean, and that's kind of the kicker in general, right? You
yeah.
taste. I used to do these tastings with people where we would taste. This is gonna sound grotesque. We taste like 35 or 40 whiskeys in a night, even if it's
Dude,
just
I've
like a
been to
sip of
Julio's.
everything.
Yeah.
Fucking, I like by whiskey 20. I'm seriously going. I think it's whiskey. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? I mean, it
Right?
is
Yeah.
just like,
I have a funny story, and I'll
yeah.
pick that
Sorry,
up in a sec, but yeah.
I was going to answer this with
Yeah, do.
availability in Canada. Funny thing, Canadian Chris, and obviously, Pinch Hitter Whiskey Lounge. I'm really sorry, guys. I, we, so we bottle it here and we're based here and we have all our licensing here. And by here, I mean the US. And so like expanding into Canada would actually be enormously difficult, particularly because it's been almost impossible to travel there. We're
Mhm.
dying to make this available in Canada. But from just like the size and scale of our brand and what the logistics nightmare would be to make this available in Canada. And we tell Canadian people this all the time because Canadian people like this style of whiskey too. And they're always like, hey, can I get this? And I'm always like, I can't believe that I'm telling you that I bought all the barrels from Canada and I can't sell it to you in Canada. But not yet. I'm trying desperately. We've had like 5 trips to Canada canceled in the last year. So like I'm telling you it's gonna happen. We're gonna make it happen. It's just not there yet. If you can get it in Michigan, much love.
Yeah.
It's
This is
amazing
gonna
how
blow
much
the
some of the
Canadian
northern
people's
states like this stuff.
this'll
Blow
blow
brains out.
Canada's
Yes.
socks off. Like, it's so different
I,
than what they have over there, like, at least from what I've
I will
tasted.
say, like, BC, British Columbia has one of the coolest whiskey, like, particularly the craft side.
Mhm.
I hate the word craft, by the way.
Yeah.
I think we should just call it the small distillery side.
Mhm.
In terms of like cool small distilleries, BC created some of the most whiskey friendly laws in the world,
That's
and
cool.
has as a result created one of the coolest, like as soon as this COVID thing cools the f down and I can go start traveling for whiskey again, like
Yeah.
leisurely, not for work, but like
Right.
I love to go to Scotland most years just to go to distilleries because I
Mhm.
love it so much, and I go to Kentucky every year because I got family. Like Canada, doing a Canada trip, I can't wait to go to BC because it is legit one of the best whiskey places in the world, and nobody knows about it, which makes it doubly cool.
I
Ah,
finally picked one up. It's not the
my
95
old
or
love,
whatever, the ones that you turned
the
me on to.
99 and the
Yeah,
90.
it's
Yes,
not
yeah.
those, but I was like, you know what? I almost owe it to Nick to finally do Ball Blair on the channel. So, it's funny. I'm realizing I think about the influence that you've had on me as a whiskey drinker a lot. Actually, it's kind of funny. That's why I like having you on the channel. Um, but even though this is a little abrupt, I think I need to cut us off. Only because
Yes, let's
as
do
I
it.
mentioned, I kind of feel a little
Let's do
bad
it.
about the
I
Crusaders
feel
and
bad about it too.
the.
I feel bad about it too. Yeah, I mean, my bourbon journey just showed up in the chat with
Oh, hey, Scott.
cheers, Scott. Yeah, I know. Scott, we're firing it up in a couple days, right?
Scott, you're not allowed to
Give
drink
me a-
before Nick comes on. Come on, man.
Yeah, you're crushing
I
batch.
was
batch 3.
abstinent from batch 3 and 4 for like 2.5 weeks. It was painful. You got to have some self-control, man, Scott. Come on.
Well, and Scott's a huge batch 2 fan, so I'm
Yeah.
glad he loves batch 3 because I know he's going to enjoy batch 4.
Yeah.
I can't wait for him to drink that.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Just knowing Scott, honestly, it makes a lot of sense that he was more into batch 2. I still think that I'm more in batch 1, but as I mentioned, I know I'm in the minority there. But
I'm going to tell you, I'm going to say something that the rye drinkers may find offensive. And if you're a rye drinker, I apologize, but a lot of rye drinkers think they're rye drinkers and really they're bourbon drinkers. And what it is like the idea and the spiciness of rye is very appealing. But they like 51 percenters. They like people love the concept of rye. But the quality of rye just in general is not very high yet. It's getting there. It will get better over the next 10, 20 years. But like a lot of the most popular ryes taste a whole hell of a lot like bourbon. And so it's really interesting how many people I pour batch 3 or batch 1 and batch 2 for, or batch 3 and batch 4 for, and they're like, man, I thought I was a rye lover, but man, batch 2, you know what I mean? And I'm like, yeah, I know the ryes you're drinking. They're 51% rye, 46% corn, which means they're way more corn than rye.
For sure.
And on top of it, they're bombarded with new oak, so they taste like a caramel vanilla bomb, and so they taste like bourbon, and so of course you love them. And so what I've found is like people who really are obsessed with that herbaceous, like deep spice, that baking spice, that intense spice, tend to really gravitate towards 1 and 3. And the bourbon drinkers obviously gravitate towards 2 and 4. But a lot of times those middle people who have unfortunately been given way too much rye that really is bourbon, they end up drinking it and going, wow, this is spicier than I like most ryes that I drink. And I'm just like, literally the definition of rye is that it's spicy.
Right.
But
That's it.
Anyway.
No, I could.
No.
I was just gonna say one of the things I love the most about this channel that I've cultivated here is the fact that I never locked myself into any particular style of whiskey. Like so many channels, they put bourbon in the name, and Scott, I'm ignoring you. You're whatever, but like everybody put bourbon in their name because it does better SEO. But
yes,
I just was like, hey, I want to drink whiskey. Like, what can I do? And I just did everything, and I still do everything. And it's funny how many people think I'm a bourbon channel because it does, because I have the E, I suppose, in the whiskey. But I was looking at my my videos the other day. I have significantly more scotches than I ever did bourbons, and I don't know.
That's really funny.
Good.
Yeah. When I email you, I always write the whiskey dick without an E. And then it doesn't come up on my thing, and I'm like, what did I do? And then I always am like, oh, right, he puts the E in there because I actually think of you as being much more Scotch oriented than most.
Well, that's good. You're about the first person to tell me that, so I'm happy to hear it.
Yeah, it's really funny because I know the bourbon. There are so many people who. There are a ton of people who I pour batch 1 and batch 2 for. And by the way, Scott is not one of those people, even though it's my bourbon journey. But there are people I pour batch 1 and 2 for, and they don't even think about 1 because they're such bourbon people that like it's the only thing and that's it. And you're not one of those people at all. Like I know that breed of person who's just like bourbon is the be all end all. And if it doesn't taste like bourbon, if it's not bourbon, I have no interest. No, you're not. You're much more of a pan whiskey lover,
right? Like why on earth would I lock myself into anything? Actually, if anything, the amount of times where I've been pissed off at the fact that the world as a whole hasn't decided on how to spell whiskey, like that annoys me to no end. Just the fact that it's not just one way. Like it's a single word. You guys can at least leave one letter out. Come on, let's take the letter away. It's easier. Like,
Bill, I'm going to tell you right now, the conversation with Found North as to whether to do whiskey with an E or not,
was
a 3-week debate within the
I
company.
bet. And I'm actually, honestly, just knowing where you're trying to advertise, I'm a little surprised you guys landed without the E. But then I'm also kind of not, knowing that you're charging an amount that appeals to people who know what the hell they're talking about, or people who just want to buy it, whatever.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
you know,
yeah. No, that's a really good point. And for us, the decision came down to the origin of the liquid. Again, it was
yeah,
basically like, would it be deceptive to call this cast strength rye whiskey with an E, and then
mhm,
say origin Canada? And we felt like a little bit like it felt a little more honest to say, look, this is cast strength rye whiskey, no E, very indicative of this is a Canadian product, Canada origin Canada. Even though again, even though we very much try to tip our hat to the American whiskey drinker because we think it will appeal to them so much.
yep,
And you know what I mean. And riding that tightrope is tricky. Is tricky.
for sure.
But dude. I need to stop talking. I need to Bill. Let me
Dude,
just
I'm so
let me
bad at
just say
cutting you off
this.
too because I don't want to.
Because I keep talking. I know. So Bill, I'll say something and then you end. So
Go for
I just first of all, um, everybody in the chat who are here tonight, I can't begin to tell you how much. Like, I know Bill loves you, but I can't begin to tell you how much I appreciate you guys taking the time. Honestly, the other day somebody wrote to me and they were like, "You must love making great whiskey," and like making the whiskey, unbelievably fun. People drinking it, enjoying it, that's why we do it. Period. And so the fact that you guys will come on and listen to us talk about whiskeys that aren't in your glass or hopefully will soon be in your glass, it just means the freaking world to us. I can't tell you. You guys drive the industry. We love the shit out of all of you. That being said, Bill, I love you even more. No, no, seriously. Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate being able to come on here and talk about our product, and that's kind of the point. But I have just so much fun interacting with you, either in a work setting or not. I think you have a genuinely clear sense of whiskey, which is really rare. Believe it or not, people so badly want to be on the right side of what they think about whiskey, and I really believe that you just think what you think about whiskey, and it's hard to find people who are like that, even in the industry. You wouldn't believe how many people are experts, and they're just constantly just trying to say what they think other people will agree with.
it.
And so to be able to come on a show with you and do this is it's like my favorite part of the whole process. So thank you so much for having me, and I swear to God I won't say anything after thank you.
Well, I don't even know how I'm going to follow that. That was I'm definitely a man who lives for compliments, so I appreciate that. Well, let me just put it this way. I've mentioned this a couple times before. Found North whiskey is beyond. I'm going to put this as blunt as I can because I'm not eloquent at the moment. Too much cast strength whiskey. Found North whiskey is freaking amazing. Like, all four of these batches are just, every single one is different, but they're all amazing. And everything that I just can't even imagine what you're gonna do with 5 and 6. It better live up to the hype, man. Like, you're gonna you got a lot of pressure on you. Number 6, you're feeling? Yeah, good. Nice. Um, if you guys are even remotely interested, take the plunge. Just do it. It's expensive, but it's worth every single penny. And you'll see if you guys watch the video I put out on Thursday, I say exactly the same thing. It's worth every single dollar and you won't regret it whatsoever. Nick, as always, you're an awesome guest. I could talk to you literally for hours, or maybe listen to you talk for literally hours. But but I look forward to the next time that I have you on. And yeah, everybody who joined in tonight, I'm happy that you did. I hope you are enjoying whatever's in your glass, and I look forward to seeing you soon. So have a great rest of your night, and cheers.